Wonder which one I recorded to just now.
I don't know. That's pretty fast.
It doesn't even say. Oh, well, I guess I'm recording. What did they do? I don't know. Oh, I wonder if it's because I ran out of room. Up in Zoom, and when it does that, it locks you out of being able to record to the cloud.
Next story.
Yeah, they do. And for the unbelievably low price of $1 billion a year, you can get more storage.
I do.
All right, we're talking about the culture wars. We are there. I wasn't anticipating getting to the culture wars for weeks, but it's really hard to avoid. And what it indicates is almost anything you talk about, even on this timeline, brings up issues relevant to today. Let's just continue. Doug brought up last week, we were talking about teen suicide and the rates, the increase in teen suicide rates, the relentless increase in teen suicide rates. It just doesn't seem to want to stay down. And how it corresponds to, or it, correlates with a period of unprecedented prosperity and security and ease in American life. And Doug brought up the possibility. So how do you explain this? What you know, as people have written books after book after book after book on this sort of thing. But one of the issues he brought up was divorce rates. And so I looked that up, and let me make this a little bit smaller so you can see more of it, because we're only going to care about the graph. So this is what the divorce rates look like according to some law firm. And why would a law firm care about divorce? Right? Wow. What happened to my graph? Did I miss it?
No, I didn't see that.
There it is. Here it is. So this is let me hide these meeting controls so people here can see this. So this is 1860 to 2023. Look at that, 1981 to 2023. And that overlaps with a period from 1990 to 2000. What was it? Where the suicide rate was going up and up and up? 1990 to something?
So 1981 was the highest rate, and it's been coming down since.
That's what this says, yeah. Now they're probably not happy about that. But being a law firm.
Well, there's a big factor involved with that, and that is more people who choose not to get married today.
All of those factors come in. They live together first. Yeah, there's all kinds of factors that come into it. You're talking post 60s. We'll get back to this. The moral shift in the 60s, the sea change in moral sensibilities, what's considered normal and what's not normal, and what we often call, or what is sometimes called, the Overton window in various things. If you haven't heard that expression, we'll talk about that later. I have a feeling we're in the midst of the Overton window shifting in some ways right now in the last 6 months. Actually kind of shifting backward to what maybe a little more of what it used to be. But at any rate, there's a lot of reasons for this, but that's interesting that the divorce rate has gone down. That doesn't necessarily correlate to happier families. You know, one of the other factors would be child abuse reports, domestic abuse, and so on and so forth. How do they correlate? But there's all these issues that go into this. But anyway, I found that I was surprised. I thought the divorce rate would have either been steady or increasing over time, incrementally. So this kind of surprises me. And I did find that challenge between the anti-abortion speaker and the pro-abortion activist in the crowd. I've got that up. It's 3 minutes long. I don't know that we should play it, but it is really interesting. Maybe I'll save that for when we get back to today, because the whole interchange, the whole exchange is a remarkable case in point, a demonstration of the things that we've been talking about in terms of nihilism of the culture. And I don't think there's any place where that nihilism is more embodied than in the question of abortion, or the issue of nihilism is more embodied than in abortion and people's attitudes about it. But maybe we can do that later. All right, we're back here. And oh, maybe somebody can do this for me. A little late now, but I'm going to take the time to do it. I am going to put a black and white version of this on a drive. So if you want to write, you can write. And one of the office magicians, not me, can print out some copies of it. Would that be okay? These are the sort of things that a proper administrator would have thought about before he got up here and started talking.
But you're a teacher now.
That's true. Let's see here. Okay. Cool. All I have to do is look and I get a volunteer.
How many copies do you need?
This man. Maybe plus.
Does everybody want?
Maybe plus 5.
Sure.
All right. So we were talking about, we pretty much ended there with, we talked about nihilism. We got back to nihilism, which we'll get back to again very shortly. If you are new to this, nihilism is the plague of our time, in my opinion. I have referred to it as that sinking feeling when you can't quite identify what's wrong in life, but there's a desperation, a sort of a crisis mentality, and a depression and an anxiety that just doesn't have a specific cause that you can point to. And you look at your life and it's just really hard to find your feet. And so it has something to do with where we are in our culture, which we'll get back to in terms of the stories we tell about ourselves, in terms of our own existence and where we came from and where we're going. And we don't tell ourselves any stories like that anymore. In fact, you're not allowed to have a story that's overarching or authoritative about those kinds of questions. Those are all individualized, personalized, privatized questions. I decide my own meaning and my own significance and my own morality and my own truth. And it's not going well. That world, that perfect world of absolute subjectivity is not going well. And
you said my own truth. How often do you hear people say, well, this is my truth and you got your truth? I mean, that's sort of over prevailing in our society today.
I heard it 1,000 times talking to students on campus in the 90s. That's 30 years ago, 1,000 times. So yeah. Okay, anyway, we'll get back to all that. But we're here. We just talked about this period right here that I've called, and it's not exclusive, it's not my origination, the Federation of Bishops, which is a period in time in the early church, immediately, you have the New Testament period when churches are forming. And then after that period, and even later in that period, you'll see patterns developing in church life and church conduct, right? And you begin to, Paul begins to lay down rules for how these churches should function and organize themselves. And he starts talking about deacons and pastors and elders and so on and so forth. We still argue about that stuff today. And what it is that you do and how you have the Lord's table or the Eucharist or whatever you want to call it. But you have these patterns that develop in how the churches conduct themselves, and they become common. And they continue to grow, and more churches form. And how are we gonna, what is the relationship between one church and another church, and who has authority and over more than one church? And how are we gonna make decisions about what's good for all of the churches and so forth? Because it's the Roman Empire. So you have a single empire, a single governing structure under which you can operate these churches. It's not like they're even really churches in different nations per se, because the church in, let's say the church in Antioch shares the same cultural heritage and setting as the church in Ephesus. I mean, there's differences between Syria and Asia Minor, but they have a lot in common. Most importantly, they speak the same language, and they have synagogues and so forth. But anyway, so you have these leaders of these various churches, and they're just the leaders of the various churches. And it's commonly referred to as the Federation of Bishops. There's no one bishop who is sort of over all of them, like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the American military, where you have the Chief of Staff of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Commandant of the Marine Corps. And then independent of those, you have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who doesn't rule over them. He's kind of like first among equals. But right now, there's not even really a first among equals. There are certainly churches that are more important than other churches. Like, for example, the church at Ephesus, and eventually Alexandria, and I suppose Hippo, where Augustine will come from. But anyway, the church moves on. We talked a little bit about manuscripts being now passed on and copied and disseminated and so forth. That's a whole different summer. I'd love to. I've done that summer here before. We'll do it again someday. How the manuscript, how the Bible got from here. I'm sorry, here to here. We can do that too. But at any rate, we're in a period of consolidation of the Christian churches. And it's a period of hostility from the governing, eventually a period of hostility from the governing structure, from the Roman structure. It's Roman administration wise, they're not friendly to the Christian churches. And if anyone was going to be accused of being an atheist in let's say the 3rd century, the 200s, just before this blue picks up here, let's say right here, when Diocletian was emperor, or even back here when, what's the guy's name, begins with a D too, right here? Domitian. If anybody was going to be accused of being an atheist, it would be the Christian, because they did not acknowledge the emperor as a god. So they did not engage in the emperor cult. And that caused them a lot of problems.
What are the blue bars
That's
representing?
time periods. So this is what I'm calling Christian consolidation over this period of time,
Oh, okay.
over the culture. And this is going to be after the Black Plague, the Renaissance, the period. You notice here they run into each other because there's no hard and fast distinctions. The Reformation is Renaissance, and the Enlightenment, in some sense, is a child of the Reformation. Eventually we're going to get, just like postmodernism is a child of modernism, modernity. But anyway, so about this period, an important event happened. So we have, this is the age of papyrus scrolls, uncontrolled copying of New Testament manuscripts during this period. That will change dramatically once Constantine takes the throne in Rome, becomes emperor. We'll get to him in a second. But here, this is also known as the period of the Church Fathers. Right here. So this is when the names you may have heard, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Clement of Rome, Clement of Alexandria. I forget which one of those is the writer. Papias, or what's his name? Not Papias. He's one of them. Who are some of the other? Athanasius. Irenaeus, Tertullian. Yeah, those are the Church Fathers. They're writing and they're quoting the New Testament. And one of the interesting elements of church history is that if we had no manuscripts of the Bible at all, we could reproduce almost the entire text of the New Testament from quotations by the Church Fathers. We wouldn't necessarily have chapter and verse order and so forth, but they prolifically wrote on every aspect of the New Testament writings. And they had an opinion about everything, a very, very strong opinion about everything. And we'll get back to some of those controversies too. Okay. Then this period here, around the end of the 3rd century, which is the 200s, right here, and into the beginning of the 4th century, the 300s, marks probably the high point up to this point, and probably ever, of persecution of the Christian church under the Emperor Diocletian. And there's a lot of debate about it, how many actually died and so forth, but that's where the horror stories that you hear come from. Fox's Book of Martyrs has writing on that, so forth, it's worth a read.
You say that's around 300?
Yeah. And an interesting thing happened. Do I want to talk about the? Not yet, yeah. An interesting thing happened. At this point, Diocletian decides he's the emperor. He's gonna make a switch. He decides the emperor is a kind of a fatal mistake, maybe, but he decides that he is going to, this is not accurate for Diocletian, but he decides, well, maybe it is a little bit, that the emperor is too big for one person to rule, so he's going to split it in half, and he's going to have two, I don't know what you want to call them, co-regents. We're going to have a western and eastern side of the empire. And he puts, I think, we really need a church historian. I should have called Gamason and asked him if he wanted to participate in this thing, because he's got a PhD in church history, basically in church history. But Constantine was a Berber, and that's from, somebody would have to look that up. I'm going from memory here. I forget where he's from, but he is the son, I hope I get this right. You guys can all check me on the internet. He is the son of the guy that Diocletian puts in charge of the western half of the Roman Empire. And Constantine eventually will I don't know what I'm doing. Constantine will eventually win a series of conflicts that will result in him becoming emperor. But he doesn't have, he's not like Augustus, the first emperor, where it's the Roman Empire, it's Rome, right? Rome is the city, is that the one that city shining on a hill? I forget. It's all about Rome. This is the Roman Empire. He doesn't, yeah, he doesn't have any of, I thought that was Byzantium. I don't know what I'm talking about. I should stop talking about this stuff that I don't know anything about. I don't, just some of this, just enough to get the basic currents, and then if I get any deeper, it goes bad. But he decides very quickly that he's not going to Rome. He's going to headquarter someplace else. And so he decides on this place right here. Yeah. Although I'm not sure what it was called. It's old Byzantium. At this point, I don't think there's a Byzantium. There's not what we would consider Byzantium, which will become Istanbul. That's all future. So he builds on this site, and that city will be called Constantinople. And that's where he will go. And so the inertia of authority moves from west to east. And that will have major implications for the rest of church history, the Western civilization, everything. But let me go back to the map. But anyway, now this is like 850 miles. So now you can see why Diocletian would even think about doing something like what he did, where he splits the empire in half. And we're talking about from Spain all the way over here, this blue, I mean, what is that? That's 1,800 miles, I don't know, some ginormous amount of geography. But anyway, he's going to be emperor again over one empire. He's not going to go for the you take this half and you take that half sort of thing. And so he's going to unify the empire. And this is again where I wish I had.
Constantine, you're talking about
Yeah.
Well, let's kind of, I've got Daniel here, and this is starting Daniel. And the Roman Empire was basically from 27 BC to, the western part was till 476 AD, and the eastern part was till 1453.
Yeah, we'll get to all that.
You know, how long
Yeah, the western half of the empire collapsed far earlier than the eastern half, and I gotta go do more reading on that. I'm not really interested in that per se, I'm only interested in this and what it has to do with today, how we got where we are today, but some of it's relevant to how the church developed. And frankly, our whole philosophy of life and so forth. But at any rate, we now have beginning to develop. I don't know why I keep wanting to go back to that screen, but I do. We have beginning to develop, let me put it right next to it there. An eastern and western half of the empire, a Latin church in the west and a Greek church in the east. And you can see that as the difference between Rome in the west, Latin, and Byzantium in the east, Greek. And then you will have two churches developing parallel, but developing their own ways of everything. I mean, we're talking about, again, almost 1,000 miles in that day and age. There's no pop culture, there's no mass culture, there's no mass communication, there's no information age. So these two sides are going their own way with different languages as their lingua franca, if you will. And so if you ask the question, why is the New Testament written in Greek? If Rome was a Latin church, we'll get to it in a minute. But Saint Jerome, who wrote Saint Jerome in the 400, in right around 400, will translate the Bible into Latin for a church that will end up being based in the East, which is a Greek-speaking church. But that Latin translation will become the authoritative translation. So that church in the West is the Latin/Roman church, and you can see where this is going. 1,000 years later, with the Protestant Reformation, is going to be, from the vantage point of the Protestants, it's a Reformation. From the vantage point of the Catholics, it's a menace of, sedition, however you want to think of it. But that's a Latin church. That Catholic church is a Latin church, and Latin reigns supreme, and a Latin translation of the Bible reigns supreme, and that's it. There were no Greek. We're not going to be any Greek. There were no Greek Bibles, period. There was only the Latin Bible. We'll get back to that. That starts now, and this is how it starts.
When you say Bible, you mean Old and New Testament?
Yes, and other books. And so Constantine comes along, and this now can become institutional and systematic as he now unifies his empire and consolidates his power. And one of the tools that he uses to do that, and I'm trying to speak as neutrally as possible because Constantine is sometimes talked about as this great Christian saint, and then other times he's talked about as the guy who just was really, really cunning and clever and was looking for a way to unify the empire, and he chose to use Christianity to do it. Somewhere on that continuum between devout Christian and cunning, clever political ruler, is the truth about Constantine and Christianity. And he changed over the course of his life. We might want to watch this again sometime, but there's a 10-part course on something that used to be called the Great Courses. It's called Curiosity now. I forget what it's called. But anyway, there's a 10-part course on the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. And one of those is on Constantine. And it's really, really interesting. He's a very complicated guy. And if you watch Hunger Games and the way they do the culture in the Capitol, it's very reminiscent of the culture of Rome late in the period of Constantine. Anyway, beyond the scope. So you have this, you have Constantine now with all these churches out there, and you have you have manuscripts being copied, and you have uncontrolled theology where these churches all just kind of believe whatever they believe. And so he comes in and he says, all right, I'm not going to put up with this. You guys are going to get your act together. And you're gonna decide what it is that Christians are supposed to believe. And it's gonna become propagated. Because it's gonna get handed down now. This is the rule of faith for all the churches. It's, you know, a top-down, right off the bat, it's gonna be a top-down approach to this sort of thing. And so his first act then is to hold in 325, shortly after he's becomes emperor. This tells you how important settling the question of Christianity. What is Christianity? Think about all the questions for people who never had to formally answer the questions. What is Christianity? Now go through the list. Who is God? Who is Jesus? What is salvation? Who is the Holy Spirit? What is eschatology? I mean, you got all these questions. Now they have to get together. These bishops have to get together, and they're going to hash this out. And he personally presides over the first council at Nicaea in 325. And it's not a coincidence that it happens shortly after he becomes emperor. And Nicaea, I didn't pull that out. Where's Nicaea? It's right on the other side of, yeah, it's right on the other side of, I need a map, not a picture of a beautiful.
It's on the water. Like Asian Minor.
You gotta be kidding me. Is it? Maybe this has it. Anybody seen Nicaea? Right here. Yeah, so that tells you something. Look how far away from Rome. The book of Acts ended at Rome. And the implication was Rome is now sort of the center, the Christian seat of authority in Acts. Everything else kind of fades away in Acts, and Rome now takes center stage. But when this happened, that was in about 60, 61, I forget what, 60 or 62, it'd be in that time period, AD. Now, 325, after all these events happen, the first council takes place at Nicaea over here by Byzantium, right across the water, 850 miles away from Rome. So all these bishops show up these thinkers show up, and they're gonna discuss the preeminent question, which is the deity of Jesus, the deity of Jesus, the nature of Jesus. And they're gonna actually do this, they're gonna settle this twice, because these people argued about everything more than once. So there's gonna be a Council of Nicaea in 325, and then a Council of Constantinople in 381 to clarify some things. But the end result of those two councils is to create the remarkable statement which will form the foundation of Christian theology forever, I guess would be one way of saying it. And it's based on the question of who is Jesus? What do we make of the deity and humanity of Jesus? And so this is the statement. This comes out of the 381 council. I changed to we from I, but other than that, this is it. And we're going to go ahead and read it, because this statement will essentially form the basis for the development of Christianity and Western culture in terms of its overall religious narrative for 1,000 years. A little more than 1,000 years, up until even past the Enlightenment. It's not like the Enlightenment thinkers they all became atheists. They were not. But it won't be until the 1800s, with the arrival of criticism, the critical schools, scientific criticism, and Darwin and so forth, Marx and so forth, that we will see the overthrow of the very idea of a guiding religious narrative for a culture, for a society. We were given birth, the United States was birthed in the late 1700s on a religious narrative. It's just kind of a neutral. Well, you go back to the Puritans, that was not neutral. That was a religious narrative. But even with the establishment of the country, of the nation, there's the moral system upon which, the moral values upon which the nation was based were extracted from this Western tradition that had its roots in Christian theology and thinking. That was deliberate, even by the people like Thomas Jefferson, who was not a Christian, he was a deist. And Benjamin Franklin and who were the other deists? And but some of them were Puritans, but some of them weren't. But they could sit in the room because they agreed with that. So there's this religious narrative that still stands underneath all of it, that kind of binds the nation together, this common set of shared values and beliefs about the world. We'll get back to all that. Anyway, this is it. I'm gonna read it. It's that important. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. That's number one. There's your creator. We believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, born of the Father before all ages, God from God, light from, unless you, if you question what he means by born of God, what they mean by born of God, they're so meticulously specific. God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, says the bishops to a guy named Arius. Arius? Yes, Arius. Consubstantial with the Father, being coexistent with the Father, of the same substance as the Father. Through him all things were made. For us men and for our salvation, he came down from heaven and by the Holy Spirit was incarnate of the Virgin Mary and became man. For our sake, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. So there's the inherent belief in sin. For our sake, he was crucified. We'll get back to that in the creed. So we have theology, who is God, and we have anthropology, who is man, from the vantage point of God. He suffered, died, and was buried on the third day, and rose again on the third day, in accordance with the scriptures. So there's the primacy of scriptures right there. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. There's your future. There's your ultimate destination. There's that stuff I was talking about with about Daniel chapter 7. He will come again to judge in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. There it is, right out of Jesus' mouth. You will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds with power, so forth. We believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father and the Son, who with the Father and the Son is adored and glorified, who has spoken through the prophets. We believe in one holy Catholic, interesting word, and what did they mean? An apostolic church, confess one baptism for the forgiveness of sins, and look forward to the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. So there is no other way. There is one baptism for the forgiveness of sins. So it's all there. Anthropology, theology, eschatology. They had all of those most important elements, and they do it in about 230 words. After meeting for 40 years.
Imagine how difficult it must have found then to come up with such a concise.
Yeah, there was some knockdown dragouts. But what stands behind this debate here is the Arian controversy.
Yeah.
Arius was, other than, again, I know just enough to make me dangerous. Arius.
Oh,
I refuse to click on a link from Wikipedia. So 250 to 336. So he overlaps 320. He overlaps in time the first council. He dies before the second council. Anyway, Arianism affirmed a created finite nature of Christ rather than equal divinity with God the Father, and was denounced by the early church as a major heresy. Out of these church councils, that's how that happened. That doesn't mean he wasn't devout. He was just devout about a human.
was Arian the one that put up the modalism, or was that somebody else?
I got somebody else. We can look into those too. I mean, it depends on how far you want to go into this stuff. And I don't know. I mean, I don't, again, just enough to make me dangerous. And I'm working from memory on a lot of this stuff. But anyway, he had a statement. Let's see if it's in here. That was, maybe that's not in. There was a time when Christ was not, or there was a time when Jesus was not. And that was the issue that they were taking up at the Council of Nicaea, and then again at the Council of Constantinople. And their answer to that was, born of the Father before all ages. before all ages. He wasn't the first created being, he was begotten, not made. So he's almost quoting John. That's John. You see allusions to the New Testament here over and over again. But
So,
that,
It must have been, depending on John's writings were not, quoted.
I don't know enough about, and you're right, and remember, that could be, I don't know, but remember that you're at a time period, we don't have a canon of the New Testament yet. You just have a bunch of books. That's yet to come. This canon is still forming and shaping, and Constantine's gonna be the reason for that, because Constantine's gonna say, I wanna publish this for the masses. I want this to be distributed throughout my empire. Because it's cohesive. It's a common narrative, it's a common story, it's a common social glue. So he's gonna insist, in a sense, you guys sit in a room and you decide on it. Give me the thing, and then we're gonna start copying. That's overly simplified, but then we're gonna start copying. And we're gonna do it in Greek, not in Latin. Well, the Latin church is gonna have the Latin Vulgate, but these Greek manuscripts are now gonna go. Which is why the vast majority of manuscripts, there's lots and lots of Latin copies, but there's a ginormous number of Greek manuscripts still in existence today, somewhere over 5,000.
This kind of council going on the western side as well at the same time.
No, there's no. Yeah, that would probably be, I'm guessing, if anybody listens to this feed and I'm talking like an idiot, they are free to comment and correct me. I won't have any heartburn with that whatsoever. I probably got myself in over my head here. But they're gonna kind of leave the Western church behind in terms of in many, many ways. Which is ironic because when Gregory arrives in the 600s, you're gonna see the primacy of the Roman bishop. And we'll get to that in a bit. The Roman bishop will be the most powerful bishop. And by Innocent III, who was 1100s, I think, that will be the zenith of power for the Pope in Rome. And he will have power over kings. It's a strange situation. Yeah. This is why I wish I had Gamison. I got to stop apologizing. I don't care if I'm wrong. I mean, I care if I'm wrong, but it's, somebody just correct me. Okay. Anyway, they have this idea here of a universal church, small c. They're very, very serious about that. That's one of the things. They don't think in terms of individual liberty. And that's an American thing. That's a post-Enlightenment. The United States was given birth as a product of religious repression on the continent in the 1600s or something. And that correlates with the religious wars, which we'll get to, 1618 to 1648, the 30 Years' War. Talk about that later. That's all individual liberty. They don't think in terms of that. This period of time, there I did it again. This period of time will be characterized as, did I put it in here anywhere? Maybe I didn't. Christendom. It's going to be Christian society. It's going to be a Christianized society. So individual liberty is not, they're not proto-Americans or, libertarians or anything. They don't, put all that aside. It's nothing to do with what's going on in the 4th or 5th centuries. Where was I? Let's see. So they hold their council. That's where I was. Let's go back and clean this up. We inherited this authoritarian, if you will, approach, top-down approach to the religious narrative that would guide culture and society and science and so forth would go for 1,000 years into more than that, into the Enlightenment. And then they're eventually we're going to arrive at Martin Luther, who will unwittingly change things, probably in ways that he didn't want either. But that word universal, that word Catholic, which means universal, that's what they mean. This is for the whole empire. This is for the church is a single thing. And so all the churches should be on the same page. unlike today. They wouldn't have understood probably the situation today. They wouldn't have said anything about it, but my hunch is, my sense is that that's how you have to think about it with these people. And I'm not interested in judging anyone about any of these things. I want to understand. That doesn't mean I have thoughts about it, and I am judging. I mean, my timeline is a Protestant timeline. The minute you put the word Reformation on the thing, well, I guarantee you, from the Catholic point of view, it's not a Reformation. They think of it a different way. So you see your bias, but that's okay. Everybody's biased. But I just want to understand how we got where we are. All right, so you have a creator who is above and over all things. You have a redeemer, a savior, who is God from God, light from light, true God from true God, co-substantial, consubstantial, of the same substance as the Father. And you have the Holy Spirit, who is the giver of life, creator, and is also worshiped. Deity as well. You have and you have eschatology. He will return to judge the living and the dead, right out of Paul's statement in Athens. And then you have anthropology, that man is sinful and in need of salvation. Man is fallen. So that's all in there, in 230 words or so. I did a word count one time. I forgot to do it this time. But that's the creed, and in my view, the most important and the greatest creed ever written in the church. We would do well to read this thing every once in a while as a church. I don't know how Phil feels about that, or Vic or Mike. But anyway, so then over the course of this many years, from 325, that's Constantine, the next several hundred years, you have these councils, and really we only care about, if you could talk about the great church councils, it's really these first six, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are the ones. That's not even that. I'm sorry. No. It's 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I think are commonly regarded as the great church councils, where they're hashing out and clarifying theology and so forth. These two here, I'm interested in mainly because they bring up the question of canonicity. And look at where they are. Look where Hippo is. It's funny. If you try to do a Google search of Hippo, ancient, no matter how you do it, ancient Hippo,
Not that way.
ancient Hippo, I thought, okay, I even tried to, Africa, that doesn't help. No, it's just a bunch of hippos. When you do, you try to get a map, it's just hippos. But eventually I found one, but it's down the coast from Carthage. Let me just grab one of these. So it'd be right here. Here's we're way on the western side of the Mediterranean, so there's Rome right there. So Jerusalem is way over here off the map this way, and here's Hippo right here. So this is where Augustine is from. He will be arguably, not even arguably, the greatest theologian, the greatest thinker in the history of the Christian church, except for the apostles. Augustine. He's had more impact on the church than probably any other thinker after Paul and Peter, and maybe just Paul. And then you can see Carthage as well. So once the center of gravity moves away from Rome, now everything changes in terms of power and influence. But those are the ones that stand out, the great church councils.
If I recall correctly, wasn't Augustine vaguely a contemporary of Constantine?
No, Augustine was born in 354. I mean, he would have overlapped. He was born in 354. He wrote 400 and so forth.
Right, but Constantine was what, 335 to 380 or something?
Yeah, there was yeah, you could be, you're right. why did they say 337? Was it that early? I can't click on
I
that
don't
link,
think it
'cause-
was that.
I can't click on that link because it's, Wikipedia. Let me go to this one.
You're gonna put the PDF.
280 to, he died 337, so he died before Augustine was born.
Okay, I thought they were going over.
Let's see,
So the Council of Nicaea wasn't all that long before you died.
apparently not. He got kind of crazy. These emperors had a habit of becoming, paranoid. Kings just got paranoid. It was a, murder or be murdered kind of mindset.
Mhm.
And so they began to get suspicious of their wives and their sons and so forth, you know.
Nothing to do.
With what?
Probably had nothing to do with that.
Got nothing to do with lead in the water, lead pipes, you know about lead pipes, yeah. The debates about what caused the Roman Empire to collapse. There's just all kinds of theories, and one of them is it was, lead, they made their water pipes were lead. And so that had gone on for hundreds of years, and so the general theory,
Related to Flint.
huh?
They're related to Flint.
The general theory is that perhaps they went crazy and so forth. There's lots of reasons.
Well, lots of reasons, but.
That, I'm telling you, that 10-part course, there's two of them. There's one, the early Roman Republic, the fall of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. That one's really good. And they pop up on, Roku free every once in a while. And then the one on the decline and fall of the Roman Empire is also really good.
I was just speculative that it's human nature to, once you're at the top, you're worried about, dethroning.
Yeah.
And so.
Oh, and also you get full of yourself, you get so insulated. Even kings in the Bible like David were susceptible to this. Maybe it's inevitable. I don't know. And then you hope they come back like David did. Okay. What do we got here? There's the Nicene Creed. What else we got? We don't want to talk about that right. All right, let's go back to this. See if we can finish out the Federation and get to eventually, well, we're not in a hurry, so we got a summer here to do this, but I know you all want to talk about the culture wars. What's going on today, but you know, there's things to do. Anyway, that will now set the stage. We now have a common theology and a common New Testament. And now the copying will begin and it will explode. And it will be professional copying in what are called scriptoriums by scribes who sometimes didn't even know Greek. They had a Greek manuscript, and sometimes that's good. It's like I'm told to take this manuscript in German and make a copy of it, and I don't know German. Well, what that means is I can't really infect it with my own thinking. All I can do is make stupid mistakes. Like I go from one side to the other and I end up on the wrong place on the page and I just start copying. So I leave out a bunch of sentences or something, which is easily explainable. But you know, this copying goes on now. And this is when you're going to get the great church manuscript, the great manuscripts that we now have access to several of them. Go with the I should have had this ready. Codices, they're called codices. Codex Sinaiticus, which is this 4th century, they got the outside of it, which is on display. I would love to see it. We have it. Let's see the outside of it. They would adorn these books. But there you can see the professional nature of the thing, right? These are not amateurs just copying something. These are professional scribes. Block letter, all caps, columns, block letters, or block copying like this. But this is called Codex, you know, they're decorated, you know, this is one of the most important. It's from is Sinaiticus, what's the date? Let's see. That's 400s. That's the 400s, I think. Over 1600 years ago, put it maybe even in the 300s. Anyway, then you have Alexandrinus. And this is same time period. These are all like 400, even earlier. But these things, some of these, seeing the pictures of these, it's extraordinary that we still. These are basically full manuscripts of the New Testament from the late 300s, whenever the date is. I can go find the dates again. So you're talking about within several hundred years of their original writing. It's really unbelievable. And then Vaticanus. Guess where that is?
In Rome, I think.
But you know, they would adorn these books with, they would draw, you know, they just really extraordinary. So these are the three most important manuscripts in the history of the church, and they form the basis. We'll get into manuscript stuff later, but they basically are going to form the basis for our Greek New Testament that gets translated into English, more or less. It's known as the Alexandrian tradition, which you don't care about right now. Talk about that later. Anyway, that's the legacy of Constantine, who may or may not have really cared about Christianity at all. But he was no fool. He says, we're going to do this. We're going to do this right. And the way you do this is you guys get your act together, stop fighting amongst each other. Give me some theology. Give me what you believe and give me something to copy and publish, and I'll give you money and we'll get it done. And so now we're off to the races. And so theology, anthropology becomes formalized, institutionalized, if you will, in the culture. And then reinforced with published copies of the New Testament, which had never happened before. Up until Constantine, people were hiding their Bibles because maybe it's a death sentence under Diocletian.
Constantine had the edict of tolerance. Christianity would not be tolerated. That was the first step, and that's pretty much ended the persecution of Christians.
Yeah.
So they are no longer underground church. They were.
Yeah, you know, we have this idea of bishops, kind of a suspicious attitude about bishops. But if you took the job of bishop in the late 200s, early 300s over some church, it might have been a death sentence.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys were serious about their beliefs, whether you believe in the details of what they did or not. There's no question about their loyalty, their sincerity, and so forth. And also, if you were going to become a member of the church, they didn't just let anybody walk in and become a part of the life of the church. That's why baptism was so important. They didn't baptize people right off the bat. You waited because these people would recant their faith under the pressure of the persecution. And so you wait, and you know, eventually you become baptized, become part of the church. So baptism then took on a whole new meaning for that time. If you got baptized, that meant something. I mean, it meant you were a believer because you would have been gone before you got baptized. That's my understanding of it. So it's a different way of, it's not that they thought that baptism saved you, but baptism was that, maybe this is inaccurate, I don't know. From what I understand, kind of the check in the box, the validation of your faith, if you will. So that's going to take us to, let's see. Oh, we got to talk about Augustine. We'll do that next week. We'll talk about Augustine, which means I should probably learn some more about him. We're going to talk about his debate with, which I do know something about, Pelagius. And the question of total depravity, and that's not what he called it. Total inability, let's call it that. The question of total inability versus free will. And the debate that he had with, and the argument, the challenge that he had, not a debate, the challenge that he had with a guy by the name of Pelagius on this issue. And then another guy by the name of John Cassian, which will also help set the stage for the direction of the church for the next 1,000 years. And then also be one of the key things about Luther's arguments 1,000 years later. He called himself an Augustine. He claimed, I'm the Augustinian. The church, the Catholic Church, has departed from Augustine. I'm the Augustinian. And so he will have a debate 1,000 years later. Augustine had it with Pelagius. And then Luther will have it with a man named Erasmus. And it kind of recurs 1,000 years later in the early 1500s. So we'll talk about that next time. And it has to do with with original sin and what we inherit from Adam and these kinds of questions. So we'll go ahead and stop there. Anybody want a last word? Anybody want to correct me? You guys can search all this stuff on Google while I'm talking. I have no ego in it. All right, then I'll go ahead and Stacy, see you later. Naomi, Nate, how'd I do?
I'm scary. Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.